This conference will now be recorded.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Calvet Women Veterans Affairs monthly webinar series. I'm Lindsay Sin, the Deputy Secretary for Women Veterans Affairs here at Calvet. Thank you so much for joining us, for taking time out of your busy days and logging in or calling in to hear about this excellent presentation we have for you. Today is August 19th, 2020, and today we're going to discuss a little bit about the survey and report that took place among women veterans who are on California community colleges. This was a survey and report that was administered by Irvine Valley College in partnership with US Vets Beyond the Wire. A few housekeeping items, as always. Everyone is muted at the moment, so please keep yourselves muted so that we can hear our presenters loud and clear. And then at the end of the presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask questions either via our chat window, which is available through the GoToMeeting software, or you can ask questions by phone. We want to give everybody time to have questions answered should they need to get more information from our presenters or from Calvet today. This is a recorded webinar, so we will have this available on our website, which is calvet.ca.gov/womenvets, and you can find our webinar under statewide monthly webinars. There you can also see our past webinars and learn about what we have coming up for the future. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our two excellent presenters. I'm going to read a little bit about each of them and then hand this over to them so that we can get started. Our first presenter is Nancy Montgomery. Nancy is a registered nurse with a master's in nursing, a master's degree in nursing education. She is currently the Assistant Dean of Health, Wellness, and Veteran Services at Irvine Valley College. Nancy has an extensive background in community service, particularly in underserved communities and populations. She developed a community college veteran resource center suicide prevention program for staff to use at Irvine Valley College, and also in the Orange County and Los Angeles Veteran Centers areas. Nancy recently was awarded a $2 million innovation grant to scale her current Veteran Center practices across the state and wrote, collected, and published some of the first data for post 9/11 veterans across the state. So we welcome Nancy, and we also have with us Dr. Mietta Snetter. Mietta Snetter is a California licensed clinical psychologist who earned her master's and doctoral degrees from Pepperdine University. She was trained to provide a full range of mental health services in her course of study. For the last 15 years, she's focused on providing direct clinical services to our nation's veterans, having worked with the Veterans Administration, vet centers, and community-based outpatient clinics, or CBOCs. Currently, Dr. Snetter is the Director of Clinical Services for the U.S. Vets Outside the Wire program in Orange and Los Angeles counties, where she and a team offer direct clinical services to student veterans on community college campuses. And we're very happy at Calvet to work with both of these wonderful women. So thank you so much for joining us. Ladies, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you so we can start our presentation. Thank you. And you'll probably have to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, before we begin, I'd like to say thank you to Lindsay. Thank you so much for all of you who've taken the time out of your busy schedules. We know how active, how busy all of you are, and for you to join us this afternoon, it means a great deal to us. Before I begin, I'd like to say thank you broadly to Calvet for the opportunity to share on this data and this research. Nancy and I are so excited and so thrilled. So on behalf of US Vets and Irvine Valley College, we'd like to first of all say thank you to Lindsay and the Calvet team. We also would like to acknowledge a very special group of women and men. That's the WAT team, the Women's Advisory Committee connected with US Vets. That would be our very own CEO and President Steve Peck, as well as Lindsay, who's a member of our Women's Advisory Committee. I'd like to thank Susan and Judge Eileen Moore, Danielle Hahn, Drs. Emerald Archer, as well as Dr. Kathleen West. We are all a part of the Women's Advisory Committee, and we all had a part to play in this data collection. And so we're just very honored and grateful that all of you have allowed us to present on this. So we have 4 main objectives for this afternoon that Nancy and I are really going to be focusing on as we're presenting this data. First, we really want to introduce the data that we were able to collect. We'll talk about it within the context of women veterans in Orange County and how that can be more broadly generalized to the broader community. And then we're really going to be focusing on what that means for the future, supportive services, and how that really reinforces what we have found to be necessary. And that is providing more supportive services to women veterans as they're being discharged out of the service. And then specifically, we'd like to engage you all, invite you to take part in this discussion and know that you are a part of the solution. So at this time, I'm going to pass it on to Nancy. She's really going to get into the details of the female veteran study and what we were able to find, and then she's going to pass it back on to me a little bit later on. Nancy Montgomery.
Okay, so let's go to slide 4 if we can here. This was what Miata just spoke about, our objectives here. So we're talking about the introduction to the female veteran survey. What happened was when we got this $2 million innovation grant at our college, I wrote the grant along with a couple of my wonderful colleagues at the college. We found that when we advocated for funding, advocated for anything with veteran services, with the state legislator in office or in DC somewhere, all they kept asking us was, you can talk all you want, you can ask us for whatever, we need to see data. So we noticed that we didn't have baseline data in California. So we thought, let's use the community college system, because we have over 90,000 veterans in this system, that we could actually access and figure out where we're going to get that baseline data, find out where we're at, and then we can have something to hand them in person. So that's actually what prompted this data to come out here. And it's really important that we do that. So we've got, oops. Okay, can someone mute their phone? I think we're hearing some background static there.
It's going to be difficult. Nancy, I'm going to mute everybody. Just unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you. Got it. Okay, so what we found was we worked with the RP group, a well-known evaluation research group, and we put together, using the WAC, really qualified women to participate in this. Miata and I worked on these questions, and we delved into what we're looking at with female veterans. Out of the 114 community colleges that we have in the state right now, we found that if you talk to any one of them at any time, they will say, we don't have very many female veterans that come into our center. They use their benefits, they come in and out, but they never really stay. They don't want to participate too much. They're not active in it. So we found when we did this survey, we're looking at things, female veterans are 9% of the national population and 27% of our veteran population attending these colleges there. There's 78% of our veteran resource centers, which is what we call those, our centers in the community colleges. We call them our veteran resource centers. We have our veterans participating then. I'd say only about a handful have complete one-stop services. There's not a lot of them that have, even though there's 78% of them out of the 114 that have a center. Some of them are as small as 100 square foot. They're a room with a door, that type of thing. But there's a lot of other ones building, because we've actually gotten some funding to help our veteran centers. So we are starting to build them out and offer a lot more services. We found in this report that college support for female veterans is critical. It's critical to their success, it's critical to their persistence, and it's also critical to their completing their educational goals and moving forward. Okay, next slide. So some of our findings was that the National Veteran Suicide Prevention Annual Report gave us some of the data that there's 16.8 per 100,000, 2.2 times higher than non-veteran are in our women there. Women veterans have a higher rate of suicide there. They have an increased risk for military sexual assault. Now, We know that, we've heard that, things have not changed over the years. So we need to keep addressing this until we get some type of change on that. And that's concerning. And I'll let the expert, Dr. Snetter, talk to you about that a little bit more further on here. They have increased risk, therefore a number of mental health problems, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then the supports further research which identifies ways to support female veterans as they transition back. One of the things I often hear female veterans say is that when they were in the military, they became a part of a unit. They became with men, they were with men, with women, mostly men, but they became part of that union, and it really didn't matter if they were female or male. They were a part of that team. Everybody protected each other. They became that strong held family. When they were discharged, what happens is these young men and women went their separate ways. Everybody went their way. They went home to their families, to their girlfriends, to their boyfriends, whatever they were doing there, but they left. They didn't have that camaraderie anymore. They weren't able to reach out and joke with the guys and have fun with the guys and go have a beer with the guys or anything like that anymore, because they went home, a lot of them, to their wives or their girlfriends. So therefore they were kind of isolated and left alone there, which I think attributes to a lot of what you're reading here: the depression, anxiety, the isolation, the actual feeling of I'm not part of that unit anymore. And that's really traumatic a lot of times, not only for females but for males when they leave the military. More so with females because a larger percentage of them come home with, or they take care of children on their own too. And they are, again, isolated. They don't have the girls group. They don't have those 5 best friends in their groups anymore, or families that they can go to the show and do things with. So that really makes a difference there. Our next slide. When we look at, we hear female veterans speak, they face so many hurdles. But in this study, you'll find that nearly half, 45% of them, face some type of food and housing insecurity, and half face some type of form of housing insecurity coming home to where they don't have a place to live. Most military, I will tell you, when they leave that base, from what I've seen in our military that enter our community colleges, if you ask them, did they have a place and plans when they were discharged, where to go, where they were going, they're going to say no. That's why a lot of them end up homeless when they leave the bases there. They're not looking at these events that are going to happen when they are discharged. They're not preparing for them. So therefore they end up, and I think that's a lot of male and female suffer from that same thing. The problem is with female though, is where do they go when they leave if they have a child? If they have someone else to care for, what are they going to do? There's a lot of responsibilities that are a little bit different for females there. The mental health aspect, nearly 2/3 of respondents indicated a mental health diagnosis. Now, diagnosis and feeling depressed are 2 different things. When you have a diagnosis, that means that you have been treated by a medical professional. Somebody's caring for you. They're even giving you medications to you, or you're in some type of therapy or support type of thing. That's a completely different thing. When you look at people saying, oh, I have PTSD from the atrocities or the trauma that I've seen while in the military, I'm going to say the larger percentage of them have that when they come out. The larger percentage of us in the general population have some form of post-traumatic stress. When you have a loved one die, when you have something happen in your life that's traumatic, an accident, cancer, something that's going on in your life that is traumatizing to you. Rape is one of the biggest ones there. We kind of all suffer from that. The problem is that when you have combat trauma and you have a different type of trauma there coming out of the military, especially sexual assault, military sexual assault, that's a different type of trauma. When you are diagnosed with something, when you're looking at this study, it plainly reported that they had a diagnosis, and 43% had reported considering suicide. That's a very high rate when you look at the suicide numbers and suicide ideology within the general population of military. 43% is a very large number. So we've got to pay attention to those numbers. We need to enact some type of programs to address those and look at those right away. Military sexual assault, otherwise known as MST, 2/3 of respondents endorsed MST as a higher rate than what is typically reported among female veterans broadly. And I cited a study there because that is one of the studies that we compared the numbers that we got across the board to a research study that these individuals had completed in 2007. Again, I make the statement that we have not changed the military in the sense of how we address military sexual assault or how we decrease those numbers. You hear talk about it all the time. I know Washington, D.C. puts out all types of information. The VA does, that we're working on this. We're looking into this in the military. We've got to put in a lot more stricter policies and protocols to decrease these numbers. It's not only happening to women, it's happening to men. We have to be aware of that. However, when it happens to a woman, those type of things are carried off in a different manner. They're treated in a different way. And a lot of times in the military, they're kind of ostracized from what's going on and the ability to seek services or speak up about those services. Next slide. So when we look at MST, over half, 55%, indicated never having received counseling or support to deal with their MST. I think anybody knows that if you don't receive some type of support for a traumatic incident in your life, we kind of long-term suffer from that. You hear about these stories when individuals were sexually abused when they were younger. They don't actually bring it to the forefront until sometimes in their 40s or 50s. They suffer with that the whole time. It can be expressed by eating disorders, some type of speaking out on certain things, anger. A lot of things comes from that. It is vital that we check, and I'll be honest with you, that we don't even ask, we treat for any type of MST, any type of assault, any type of aggressive behavior in the military before they're discharged. Wouldn't even say ask, because nobody's going to tell you the truth, to be honest with you, because they don't want to disclose that about themselves. That's something you want to keep within yourself. You don't want to tell that. That's why a lot of people hold that within for so long. But it is vital that, why do we have to ask that question? Bottom line is, let's treat before they're discharged. I think that goes along with what I've advocated for many, many years, is that when individuals are in the military, they are serving, they need to be enrolled in the VA healthcare system prior to leaving that base. They can be enrolled 6 months out because there is a process to get enrolled, but the minute they step off that base, they have VA medical services to follow them through. Accessing outside services could change the perception of how am I going to get help, or why I get help, or how I get help. So all of those things are kind of important that we look at when we look at, if you're looking at 55% have indicated not getting counseling, what are we doing about it? How are we going to address that? This low support rate is not associated with a lack of interest, instead a lack of knowledge of and or access to these supports. Again, advocating for just treating before anybody, male or female, leaves that military base could help solve and alleviate some of these. Maybe supplying those resources and being in a VA healthcare system before they leave could really prove to improve the outcomes of that and decrease a lot of those issues that go along that, especially the long-term effects. Over 2/3 of respondents were unaware that they are eligible to receive free MST-related care. And I'm going to tell you right now, the majority of veterans are not. There is some criteria to be able to qualify for health care benefits from the military, but I will tell you right now that, or excuse me, from the VA. The military, you're always covered once you're in. But when you are discharged, there are some qualifications there. But I will tell you that if you have any type of ability to know the resources when you are discharged out of there, that can alleviate a lot of stress. Also to know that they're private. Also to know that you're not going to be reported to a different agency. It's not going to be written on your records, those type of things. All of those things attribute to how they access care and who they access care with. That's one of the things that we've addressed in our complete one-stop at Irvine Valley College. Is we have a complete one-stop service area. My mental health providers are there 4 to 5 days a week, and everything that they report stays in that chart there with that agency or that provider. They do not report to VA. They don't report to other people. We don't give those records out to anybody. All of those things are HIPAA controlled and they stay there. That's vital that we continue doing that, that we offer those resources to the individuals so that they can seek the help that they need and not wait till they're longer term suffering from different type of occurrences or disabilities that come from that. Next slide. Transition from military to civilian life. Nearly 2/3 of respondents indicated participating in a transition class provided by the military before exiting, yet only 1/3 of participants found it helpful. We're trying to revamp that, and we've been working with different agencies, and Calvet is one of those, to get a lot more information out there, information that they want. And I think we've made some strides in that. So I believe that we've got to work a little bit more to make sure that we're meeting the goals. I think a lot of times our hands are tied on what we're allowed to talk about and the length of time and with a process. And remember, across the country, these transitional programs actually vary in number of days. Some are 1 day, some are half a day, some are a week-long programs. And what they cover, the quality and the quantity of items that they cover in there is also different across the country. So that makes a difference on how people feel it helps them, what they get out of it, and what they don't. When considering preferred supports upon transition, respondents most frequently listed housing as their highest priority, followed by education. Housing is probably the most difficult to find there. They have a place in Santa Ana called the Heroes Landing right now that they're housing a lot of homeless vets and all, and I believe they're full at about 75 or 77 individuals in there. We should be offering, and I'll tell you, I say we, but big companies that own huge apartment complexes should offer rent that's half off for veterans. We should be offering housing for veterans that are transitioning out. Community colleges are known to not have housing on their campuses, although that is going to be changing in the future. The Chancellor's Office has asked a lot of community colleges to look into some type of housing that they can actually use in community colleges, because we don't have that. Four-year colleges do have that most often on their campuses. A lot of groups are trying to advocate for getting even lower rent areas around the colleges so that they can offer, maybe the rent is $1,000, maybe they can get it at $500 if they're a student. There are a lot of other avenues that generalized students, regardless if you're a veteran or not, don't know about, by asking for Pell Grants and different type of financial aid that they can qualify for, along with taking their board and housing, which can make a difference. So if they don't know these things, they don't know where to get them. But again, I think that that's a priority that we should actually be listing and having those housing units available for them to get into, so that they don't have that disparity and that homelessness when they do leave. Recently, I had 2 young men show up at our doorstep that were from Texas, and they were discharged out of Camp Pendleton. They weren't going back to Texas, but they showed up at Irvine Valley College to enroll in school. And when we asked them, because we have an intake form, where are you going to be living? What is your address? And they said, we don't know. We're going to live in our car until we figure it out. That's not a good answer. So we need to have a little bit more on that. Further, they were more likely to cite challenges connected to healthcare, employment, and finances upon transitioning back to civilian life. If you think about those things, they didn't have to worry about healthcare when they were in the military, because they have actually a very efficient and well-developed healthcare system while you're in the military. They do a lot of research. They have a lot of experienced MDs that actually work with the military. They don't have to worry about that too much. Employment, needless to say, they're employed by the military. Finances, they don't have to worry about finances and writing checks for housing and electricity and credit cards and all these things most often, because they're not having all of those things going on right now. When they come out of the military, we have to start from step 1. They have to open a checking account most often if they didn't have one. They have to figure out where their next meal is coming from. They have to find housing. They have to figure out how to make a bill list of actually how to pay bills. And we've had to have those classes in our Veterans Center to start from step 0 to actually acclimate them back as to what it takes to live in the civilian world again. Here's what we got to do. We're almost starting from step 1. Our age range is about 24 to 34. So you're not dealing with young children here. You're dealing with adults that want to handle their own finances, handle their own circumstances, but we need to help them along and help them build that security and resources to be able to do that. Okay, next slide. And I think I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Snetter right now.
Thank you, Nancy, so much. And as I get ready to share what this really means, could we go back and reference the military sexual trauma slides for just a few moments? Yes, thank you. So when we think about military sexual trauma and this idea of transitioning out of the service, it's important to really take a look at her. And I say her, understanding that military sexual trauma is not just specific to women, men experience it as well. However, this presentation this afternoon is clearly about female veterans. So if we take a look at her transition out, she's got all of these difficult challenges. She's used to having medical taken care of. She's used to having food taken care of. She's used to knowing her job responsibilities. She's used to that strong camaraderie, that brotherhood, that sisterhood. She's used to being a part of one mission, the group think, and how significant the mission is to the entire group, to now transitioning into a form that almost requires her to think about herself and to think about her own needs. Now let's take a look at women and what women typically experience, and that is women oftentimes are more nurturers in the family. Doesn't mean that men cannot be, but let's think about women oftentimes more the nurturers in their family. They're taking care of their children, taking care of their parents, taking care of aunts and uncles, grandparents. They're going to take care of what needs to be done. They're also now transitioning out of the military, thinking about academics, thinking about how am I going to provide for myself? How am I going to provide for my family? How am I going to provide for my children? Those are the things that take the first priority. So when we think about military sexual trauma, she's more than likely not going to think about herself because she's used to thinking about the mission and the group. And now she's thinking about her family and how she's going to be able to provide for them. So that's one of the first challenges. The second challenge is many female veterans don't even recognize that what they may have experienced in the service qualifies as military sexual trauma. So she might be thinking that, well, because I wasn't raped, because I wasn't, in my mind, what I have envisioned as sexual trauma, I didn't experience that. I disqualify myself from receiving services at the VA or reaching out and deciding that I need to take care of myself. So in that transitional challenge, it means we as a community have to recognize that she may or may not even identify herself as qualifying for receiving services at the VA or qualifying for receiving services that are specific to military sexual trauma. If she has been patted on the behind, if she's been catcalled, if she's been exposed to jokes of a sexual nature, if she's been in an environment that's not healthy, that's not safe, and it's specific to her sexuality and her gender, that qualifies as military sexual trauma if the impact and the result of it and the influence is a reduction in her ability to feel safe, to feel comfortable, and to be able to function. So that means, again, as a community, we have to recognize it so that we can start to educate the broader community and help her to identify that she may qualify and need to receive some of these services early on, sooner rather than later. Now we can go on to the next slide, please. So what does all of this mean? All of this data, we can collect data. Data is wonderful, and I did notice that as Nancy was sharing, a few questions were surfacing about can we get access to this report? Absolutely. This report will be made available to you. But what does all of the data mean? All of you who have joined this afternoon webinar, you are, as we mentioned early on, a part of the solution. But we first have to educate ourselves and become more aware of what this means. So I think about two things. Think about a female veteran who had not been discharged any longer than 6 months. She found herself, interestingly enough, at Irvine Valley College, and I provided services to her, had the opportunity to work with her. And for confidentiality reasons, I'm going to alter her story just a little bit for obvious reasons, for confidentiality, to respect that. However, I had the opportunity to work with her for a couple of years before she transitioned on to a 4-year college and university. She came in because of substance abuse. She had one DUI, and she didn't recognize and realize why she was gravitating towards alcohol, didn't really enjoy it, but she found herself, engaging in drinking on the weekends, hanging out with friends that were drinking, and finding herself getting into trouble. She was in an unhealthy relationship. She was the main provider for her family, her mom and her siblings. She was the one who was paying the note for the where they were residing. And she came in with anxiety, with depression, depression, difficulties paying attention and focusing on her schoolwork and her academic work. Now I'm going to share something that I found to be really interesting. At the beginning of an intake, as we as mental health providers are getting to know an individual, we always ask certain questions about a history of trauma, about substance abuse, about family history, things of that nature, military history. It did not surface until well after a year and a half, after we were able to stabilize her drinking. She's now sober. After we were able to stabilize her housing, she had some difficulties with the landlord. After we were able to stabilize her academics, she's now graduated and has been accepted into a four-year college or university. But after more than a year and a half is when she finally said, you know, Dr. Snetter, I did not endorse this when we first met, but I experienced sexual trauma while I was in the military. And I'm recognizing that what we've been working on and what we've been talking about managing my emotions, knowing that my emotions are not there to hurt me or to do me any harm, but they're there to inform me, and that my alcohol and my substance abuse was to manage and to minimize those feelings and those memories. Finally, the connection was made. Here's why I'm saying this, as we're talking about military sexual trauma and getting ready to get into what all of this means. She didn't recognize the connection that had been impacting her day-to-day life and functioning until she was in an environment where it was safe and comfortable, and she felt like, I can talk about these things now that I've made that connection. So what does it mean? Well, here's what it means. It means that, again, this partnership, even with CalVet, this is a part of the solution. Partnering with other organizations, partnering with women veterans, allowing them to be a part of the solution, opening up the opportunity for dialogue, which is where we're going to end this particular webinar. This is a part of our responsibility. And I'm brought to the second story that I'd like to share with you really, really quickly. Had the opportunity to share some months ago during this COVID-19 stay-at-home period of time. And so it was a virtual presentation, and I had a female veteran who asked a question, and she said, you know, we're oftentimes talking about reducing stigma. Do you see it making a difference? Do you see all of the efforts that we're making towards reducing the stigma? Is it making a difference? I thought her question was so insightful and so relevant, because in essence what she was saying is, are we seeing the needle move? Are we seeing changes? And how can we facilitate further changes? And this is what my response was, and I'll share that with you because I think we're all going to agree that many generations ago, we didn't even have women veterans who were able to serve, and the expansion of servicing that we're able to, or that women are able to in the military. I'm not a veteran myself. I'd like to make sure that that's clear so that I don't take credit for what I do not deserve. However, after 16 years of working within the veteran community, I like to see myself as a part of the solution and advocacy for women veterans and veterans across the board, but women veterans in particular. And I had the opportunity to share that there was a time when you weren't able to do the job that you were able to do in the military. There was a time when you weren't able to receive services when you went to the VA. There was a time when the broader civilian community looked at you and did not think that you could be a veteran. We have changed. We have made progress. So what this means is, what Nancy has presented and what these findings and the data present is a microcosm of the broader community. We recognize that sexual trauma is unfortunately a reality in our culture, and many times women veterans, because first of all they don't identify themselves as needing and wanting special treatment or special care, they may disengage from receiving services. Another challenge is, I don't feel comfortable going to the VA, is what I've heard many women veterans say. I don't feel comfortable with the male-dominated, male-heavy, there's a lack of women providers. I don't feel comfortable. We are making strides. The VA is doing all they can. However, we have a responsibility also to have a voice and to help facilitate that process. So next slide, please. We are a part of the broader community. Thank you. So again, what this means is not minimizing the work that we've already done and not minimizing the progress that we've already made. We start there by acknowledging what we've been able to perform and the progress that we've been able to make. Nancy and I, we've been working with one another for about 5 years when I was providing mental health services directly on IVC's campus as well as other community college campuses in Orange County. And shortly after working on IVC's campus, she invited me to go to Sacramento, where we were going to take, I want to say more than 40 or 50 student veterans across Orange County campuses to Sacramento to talk to assemblymen and women, to talk to politicians. We wanted to have the voices of men and women veterans speaking on their own behalf, advocating for themselves. And 3 years later, I believe, now it's 3 years later, we've been able to acquire millions of dollars of funding that's going to be released to the 114 college campuses to facilitate increasing services to the Veterans Resource Centers on these community college campuses statewide. So that means small steps have managed to produce funding that can impact that transition that we're referencing right now to not only veterans, but specifically to women veterans. So that $10 million we have in the bank on community college campuses. So I say that again because our responsibility to the current conflict era, OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and acknowledging all of the other combat and non-combat eras, women veterans, it means we have to again be knowledgeable of the progress that we've made and to be willing to build on that progress. And finally, not to despise. I heard this saying from someone many years ago, and it really resonated with the work that we find ourselves involved in as a mental health provider on community college campuses, and that is not to despise the day of small beginnings. Small beginnings can build and facilitate broader community changes. And just as we've been able to see changes on the community college campus level, that is, again, a microcosm for what can happen in the broader community. Next slide, please. So as we get ready to transition into some of the conclusions and the ideas, I want to say something about military sexual trauma yet again. And that is this kind of trauma, research finds, as well as my own anecdotal experience, is that a person against person trauma is the most difficult kind of trauma to recover from. So that means the campuses, the community at large, and those of us who are a part of being mental health providers or educators on your college campuses or privately funded organizations, academic organizations, US Vets being one of those that has a program called Women Vets on Point, where that program is specific to the needs of women veterans, where we provide therapy resources, we provide case management resources, and most importantly, it's a program that is overseen by women veterans. They help to make that connection and to make that transition a little bit smoother, a little bit easier by being able to say, I've been there, I've done that. I know how difficult and how challenging it is to say, I need help, and to feel like I'm focusing all of the attention on myself. But that is a part of the responsibility that we all have to be proactive in our advocacy and to engage women veterans. I want to share something again that I learned several years ago at a conference that I attended, and it was a suicide prevention conference, and you all are almost going to be as blown away, I imagine, as I was. So this was a suicide prevention conference several years ago. So it had mental health providers of every discipline, as well as community activists who were part of this. More than 350, if I'm not mistaken, participants. And there was one segment of the presentation that inquired of all of the members who were there, the attendees rather, what do you think is the #1 challenge for those mental health providers who do not ask about suicide? What is the #1 challenge or the #1 reason that you believe that mental health providers, not civilians, mental health providers do not ask the question and really go into great detail about suicide with their clients? And this is what was stated. They had a survey, and one of those immediate surveys where people can respond in real time and then it appears on the screen. The #1 reason was that mental health providers across disciplines didn't know what to say, what to do next. I know that sounds like an indictment against the mental health providers, and frankly, it is. But I'm here to say this, that if mental health providers have a difficult time from time to time asking sensitive, delicate, uncomfortable questions, that means that the broader community will have a difficult time if we aren't able to provide the how do you do it? How do you deliver? How do you ask those sensitive, delicate questions? How can you give yourself permission ultimately to care about her? To care about her transition out of the service, recognizing that she served her nation and she may not necessarily feel like a veteran, because even when she goes to the VA and other service organizations, the assumption may still be that she's not the one who served, but it's her husband, or that it's her father, or that it's her brother, or someone else. We still have a ways to go. But again, if we think about this being the findings of this research, a microcosm of the broader situation and the broader challenges, that's where each and every one of us has a role and a responsibility to play in being a part of the solution. So Outside the Wire, which is the program that offers services at IVC and other community college campuses, has the ability to provide direct mental health services on the community college campuses to the student veterans. And as I made mention of, Women Vets on Point does the same in Los Angeles County. And we refer to Los Angeles County when a woman needs additional services. But if we're not comfortable with the ask, if we're not familiar with the research that says that more than half of women veterans endorse military sexual trauma, but in the broader community, she may not be going to the VA. In the broader community, she may not be identifying herself as having experienced sexual trauma. In the broader community, she may not take care of her own needs because she's focused on the needs of her family, and she's focused on the needs of her children. She's focused on other higher priority needs. And as I mentioned with my client, she may not be comfortable until someone encourages her to acknowledge those experiences that she may not necessarily speak about voluntarily. So this webinar is really about presenting the data, acknowledging what it means, and the implications that it has to offer. And then finally, we're going to open this up to a discussion, a broader discussion, so that each and every one of you recognizes your role and recognizes that you have a part to play. And lastly, again, I'll say this. Every big challenge, every big problem that we as human beings actually face, we always make progress and facilitate the forward movement by first recognizing that there is a problem, acknowledging that we still have a ways to go with supporting women veterans on college campuses, in the community. We still have a ways to go with asking those difficult questions. We still have a ways to go with knowing how to deliver and how to engage her when she comes back home. First, acknowledging the problem, and then being able to acknowledge that we have made progress. We've already moved the needle, which was this woman veteran's question. We have moved the needle. Certainly, we have a ways to go, and this data helps to further illuminate that we still do have a lot of work to do. And then thirdly, identifying what are those specific steps. What are those programs that can be offered on the college campuses with the funding that we've been able to acquire? And what further direction do we feel that as a community of supporters and advocates for female veterans, that we can move that needle continually in that direction? So it does not mean that we need to overhaul, change every part and every aspect of the services that you are offering in your organization or on your particular campus or in your organization. It means let's take a look at what's working well, and let's take a look at what's not working so well, and be willing to acknowledge that we have made progress, but that we have to identify the specifics of the direction that we need to go into. And so next slide, please. We're going to get into the recommendations. And at this point, Nancy and I are going to talk about these recommendations. We'd like to, again, redesign the transition classes. I think there's one other slide that we may have missed, a recommendation slide, if I'm not mistaken, may not be present. So,
yeah.
Yes, there it is. Thank you so much. So I may have passed it. Sorry about that. So we'd like to redesign the transition classes that Nancy made reference to. Does it mean that we again have to start all over again? It means let's acknowledge what's working, what's not. Regularly engage her. We want to hear her voice. We want female veterans to be a part of the solution that is intended to help support her transition, as well as the transition of her sisters when they leave. About 8 months ago, I had the opportunity to present at Camp Pendleton. And at the end of that presentation, I was talking about U.S. vets and outside the wire and what we present and the transition challenges. I had been invited by an intern who is a Marine. And at the end of that presentation, I had 2 women veterans, active military, they're still in the Marine, approached me to the side. And one of them in particular really, stuck with me. And what she told me is, I've been in the service for about 18 years. I'm going to be retiring very soon, and I have no idea what to do. I have no idea where to go. I have no idea what job I'm going to go into. And what she was saying is, could I get your help? I know that U.S. Vets offers services, and she again pulled me to the side. And that was so significant that she was able to recognize that after 18 years of knowing her job, knowing her duty, knowing the responsibility, taking care of other people, managing other women and male active military, knowing her job to a T, recognizing that when I get out of the service, when I retire, I'm going to feel pretty lost. And I'm going to need some support and need some help. So actively engaging her and then addressing some of these food and housing needs, acknowledging them, knowing that that's one of those sensitive questions that not everyone is going to feel comfortable with asking, but our delivery is going to help her to feel comfortable in recognizing you are someone who cares enough to ask me that difficult question. How has your transition been since you got out of the service? How long have you been out of the service? What are some of the challenges that you've experienced? I don't know all of the answers, but I want to be able to help you however I can. Getting her to open up, getting her to talk about that, having educational forums on the community college campuses as Outside the Wire and U.S. Vets has the opportunity to do. And then educating the broader community about the issues and challenges that face female veterans. Not all women veterans have experienced military sexual trauma, and not all women veterans are having a difficult time as they're transitioning out. However, the numbers are significant enough for us to recognize that this is our job and this is a part of our responsibility. So at this time, we'd like to open it up to some of the questions as we are concluding. We'd like to really spend the next period of our time, Nancy and our time, answering some of the questions that have surfaced that you're thinking about, that you recognize as a challenge either on your college campus or in your organization or in your community as you're trying to assist and support female veterans. So anyone have any questions or thoughts about our presentation so far? And I'm going to also invite Nancy to come back and join with me as we get ready to open this up to a discussion, because this is the last and final part of our webinar, and it's so vitally important that we get everyone's involvement and activity. So thank you for your attention, and at this time we're going to open it up. Yes, Nancy.
Eileen Moore did ask a question on here that I saw. That she said, let's treat before they are discharged. Do you mean by the military or by the VA? So let me tell you how that process works is while they're active duty, needless to say, they have all the health care provided on whatever base they're on. They can go to those military hospitals and be seen, deliver babies, do whatever they're going to do there. When they're discharged, they transfer into what's called VA health care. Then at that point, they can't access the military base at all for medical services. They have to transfer into that. And again, as I said, there are some qualifying factors on that VA healthcare. So you have to qualify to get that. Most often they do, but just so there are some issues there. And then what I was stating is, I strongly believe that 6 months out, they generally know about 6 months before they're going to get discharged. Why can we not just start classes on handling and just treat everybody as they had MST, that they have depression, that they have anxiety, that they have these issues? That's what I'm saying. let's treat them as if everybody has them. And if they don't, good for them. They're just going to up their education level on the topic. But at least we're going to treat them and they'll know some tools and skills on how to handle things, or even how to help their buddy or their friend that's gone through it. Anything helps, and it just ups their education level. And the one thing I did want to clarify that Dr. Snetter said is, I would be remiss if I did not mention Todd Steffen, Daniel Abigalio, and Patty DeOrange Martin. They started that venture with me. Actually, Todd one time in a meeting said, you know, about 5 years ago, we might as well just start advocating for veterans to get some funding. And I said, well, you know, I'm really good at party planning, so let me do that. So I put together the plan to go into the state legislature and we've brought over the past 4 years over 500 veterans to the state capitol. Daniel, Todd, me, Patty, and now Dr. Snetter, to advocate for themselves and talk. And the first couple of years, I'm going to tell you, it was very trying because I kept asking, what are you doing with data? Show me the data. Senator Richard Roth is one of our big advocates in the state of funding us. That's where we got the $10 million, is by us bringing this data and proving to him the need is there. Because I could say all these facts and data collection that I had done, they really didn't care. And Daniel and Todd brought all the veterans from the up north portion of the state. We brought them all from down south. Miata worked and brought some in LA, but we all met at the state capitol, and it was an all-day function. We had tents out, we had lunch for them. Daniel got some people to donate donuts and coffee, but every veteran came because there was a cause. And we need to empower our veterans, male or female, to speak up for what their needs are, what they have going on in their life, and to talk about and participate. Just what Miata just stated on here. We need these kind of focus groups to enable them to state what they're missing. You know, what are my issues? Why can't I come to college? Well, maybe I have a child that I have to take care of. Maybe I take care of my elderly parent. Whatever that reason is, we've got to figure out those things. But we do have now $10 million ongoing funds via a Senate bill that is never going to leave us. Thank the Lord on that one, because of these trying COVID times. And that is divided up between the 114 colleges. My goal, and all of our goal, Daniel, Todd, me and Patty and Dr. Sanders, all of our goal was to get up to 25 million. We'll still shoot for that. It's just going to take us a little bit longer because of the economy right now. But the economy does not stop us from providing support and services. So keep that in mind. We should be having those food drives. We should have drive-through food drives for veterans specific. We should be offering.
Nancy, this is Lindsay. I just want to get to our few other questions that we have.
Perfect. Go right ahead.
Thank you. And if people do want to know more about some of the work you all have done, Daniel, Todd, Patricia, and yourself as part of the community college system, I definitely encourage them to email and contact you. And then just to clarify some of the questions that Eileen's asking around the details of qualifying for VA healthcare. I mean, yes, typically you as a service member can start the application process to receive VA benefits. It is atypical, though, for some people to want to go through the process of seeking out those mental health services or be diagnosed with a mental health condition while they're still in the military, because it does preclude them from continued military service in many cases. And that's been an ongoing issue with the VA with the active duty military, the National Guard, Reserve, et cetera, for a long time. That said, some of the CalSAP program and the transition assistance program that we do here in California does start when a service member is looking to get out 6 months or a little, perhaps right around that time, 6 months prior to discharge. So that's the plan, is to continue to educate people and give them those resources earlier on in their career. But in terms of mental health, yes, there really should be more and continued mental health support for active duty service members who are dealing with something like military sexual trauma. Now, when somebody does actually come forward and present that they have experienced a rape or sexual assault in the military, they do have victims advocates that are available to them, and they can get treatment while they're still in the military, but obviously that's fraught with some difficulty as well. So those services are available if anybody wants them. Okay, now moving on to some other questions. Certainly we want to talk a little bit about demographics and the folks that you guys had the chance to hear from in this survey. One question we had, were any National Guard or reservists featured in this as far as you know, or were these all veterans from active duty?
No, they were, most of them were veterans. The majority was veterans. Their age range, I noticed somebody asked where you get the links. If you go to ibc.edu and you go into the Veteran Services, it'll be students under the Veteran Services. Daniel Avagali also put the link on here too, if you want to just copy that link. It will give you, I have everything posted on there. Also, our other State of the Veterans Community Colleges is on there, but this survey directly is on there, and it covers all of that. But the majority of them were 87% veteran, reserves was 5%, National Guard 4%, active duty was 3%.
Okay, great. So people can find all that information in the survey as well. So, and I assume the survey was weighted by the RP research group.
Yes, it was all rated, all put together. The survey questions were all, it tells you all of the details on the actual evaluation of the survey results on here. Yeah. And also I can tell you, if you'd like to email me, I can mail this it's a beautiful little book. So it's really nice. We had them printed up. Either of the surveys, I have them at the college. So if you just send me your email address, your mailing address, and to my email, at nmontgomery@ibc.edu, I can mail these to you too. So, and it's nice to get, you can print it off the website, but it is nice to have the booklet to take with you, especially if you're going to be talking to anybody with funding or anybody you're trying to change their ideas with what goes on with women.
And
Excellent.
if I may add, I did note that someone had a question about military sexual trauma and how it's defined. I'd love to address that question because it's so relevant. And I'm so, again, glad that you asked, because that means others will have that same question who may not have asked. So military sexual trauma is not just, we're all adults. I'm just going to speak frankly and just be candid. It's not just rape alone. It can actually be sexual assault. It can be someone pushing you. It can be someone hitting you on the behind. It can be someone cornering you. It can be any individual while on active duty, an individual while she's on active duty, experiencing an environment, again, a hostile environment that is sexual in nature. Repeated jokes, she's feeling uncomfortable and she's feeling ashamed and feeling alone, and no one intervenes and says, hey, stop it, that's enough. Those kinds of things can impact mental health after you get out. Here's why. Because if you imagine her going into the service for whatever number of reasons that she may go in for, which are similar to the reasons that men go in, to, someone in the family may have been in the service and they want to be like that family member, father, grandfather, or grandmother or mother. She goes in because she wants another opportunity. She goes in because she wants to serve her nation. She goes in because after 9/11, she saw devastation and she said, I want to be a part of the solution. Whatever her reason for going in, she believes that she's going to be surrounded by brothers and sisters who have the same mindset, who have the same understanding, the same acknowledgement of the world, and same sense of, I will lay down my life for you. I will have your six. I will have your back. So that kind of relationship really feels familial. It feels like a family relationship. And she's trained with her same brothers and sisters. She goes to eat with her brothers and sisters. She works, she does everything together. And if she goes off to combat and she's deployed somewhere with these same brothers and sisters, there's a strong relationship and camaraderie. So sexual trauma is a violation of the trust that she established with that individual. Again, not only women experience sexual trauma, but for today, that's what we're referencing and we're talking about. So her trust was in that higher commanding officer or those brothers who were around her, having her back, and that she could lay down her life for them and that they would do the same. So that's why sexual trauma, that form of trauma, person against person trauma, is so difficult. And many times she internalizes, well, because it happened to me, it must be about me. It must be because I wore that bright lipstick. It must be because I wore my hair in a certain way. It must be because I went and I hung out with my brothers and we were drinking a little bit. It must be because of something that I did. She internalizes that message, that shame, that blame, that embarrassment. It's got to be about me. Therefore, it reduces her chances of wanting to get out and get help after she's out of the service and she's in an environment where she can receive services. So the VA in particular, whether she's service connected for that for MST or not does not matter. She still qualifies for mental health treatment free of charge, even if she's not service connected otherwise. She still qualifies for psychiatric assistance free of charge. She qualifies for medical care free of charge related to sexual trauma. All she has to do is say she is a survivor of military sexual trauma. Clearly, it would be better if she has a mental health support therapist, clinician across disciplines. But to answer that question, because it was such an excellent question, there are a number of experiences that can qualify as military sexual trauma. And again, it's important for us to know so that we can help support her and to facilitate that transition. I don't know if there are other questions. I hope that answered that question. I can't read all of the chat, so if there are others, just let us know, Lindsay. But I did want to acknowledge that one and respond to that question.
There
Thank
is
you.
one,
Yeah.
Miata, you can
VA
answer
dot-
the last one. I'm sorry.
Hold
I
on.
was talking about
Hold on.
providing mental health support, specializing in MST, the organizations. Miata, you may know that.
Yes, and
So,
I think
hold on.
Lindsay,
Ladies,
yes.
hold on. So thanks. VA.gov, I think you can search MST or / mental health, has quite a bit of information, as well as the cited definition of the experience of MST, how the VA defines it there. And I'm answering this question in the chat window right now. Our website, calvet.ca.gov, has a service provider database, so you can search for some of those mental health resources on our website that might give you more information about the geographic location of those services. VA.gov also has those. You can look up the various healthcare facilities, and that gives you a better idea. And then vet centers as well. Vet centers usually list their locations and the type of therapy that they specialize in, including whether or not they specialize in MST. And vet centers are also part of the VA, but if you just search veteran centers, you can find it. And then, yeah, Miata will be able to provide other services too. Women Vets on Point can, down in Southern California, can certainly connect people with service providers on college campuses, U.S. Vets Beyond the Wire program. And then Miata, you might have some other suggestions there too for mental health support for MST.
Yes, and it's actually Outside the Wire. Lindsay, you're wanting to rename our program. It's actually Outside the Wire, but that's okay.
Oh, you're right.
It's okay. But specific to military sexual trauma, I'm going to be very honest with you. There are not a lot of providers that feel comfortable outside of the VA, outside of the vet centers, as Lindsay made mention of, that feel comfortable really kind of addressing military sexual trauma. It's complicated. It's difficult work. Trauma work is hard work. It's not an excuse. I am going to share what I can share, but I just want to kind of, let that be known. When I worked at the vet centers, I was at the vet center in Gardena for about 3 years, and I was a military sexual trauma treatment provider. It was the only one. I provided group and individual therapy to both men and women. I had a men's group and a women's group specifically addressing military sexual trauma, and they would literally bus men to the Gardena Vet Center to attend my group. And I'm saying that because there weren't enough providers who felt comfortable with providing military sexual trauma, because oftentimes there's so many, other comorbid diagnoses that go alongside. And again, suicide rates are a lot higher, substance abuse a lot higher, depression, anxiety, all of those kinds of things, homelessness. There's so much more that goes along with it. But as Lindsay said, the VA has providers such as myself. I was trained at the VA, at the Long Beach VA, Loma Linda VA, so I know a lot about the theoretical orientations. That's going to be one of the most significant places that I would refer if we can support her in having the reasons for going to the VA, because she qualifies for service connection, a service connection disability. And again, it's our responsibility as a community of advocates for women to be knowledgeable of this. So they have, a military sexual trauma coordinator at all of the VAs, number one. And then once it gets into her record, we have to support her in this, into the CPRS record, which is a patient record at the VA. It helps to support her claim should later on she decide, you know what, this happened to me and it's impacted my life and I want to pursue a service connection claim. Having it in the system makes it a lot easier. So the VA clearly is our role and responsibility to help encourage her. Again, as we've already mentioned, and more information will be shared about Women Vets on Point for those who do not want to go to the VA. And with the Vet Center, you do have to be a combat veteran to go to the vet center unless something has changed, Lindsay, but you do have to be a combat veteran. So we want to make sure that we, inform her so that we're not referring her to a location where they're going to say, well, no, we can't provide services. But then the community-based outpatient clinics. I was at one of the CBOCs in Santa Fe Springs for about 6 years. They have psychologists, they have psychiatrists, medical doctors, nurse practitioners. They have a full comprehensive medical team, and it's within her community. So again, if she doesn't want to go to the VA, they do have psychologists and LMFTs, licensed marriage and family therapists, and other therapists that can provide that service to you. And then the only other recommendation would be identifying someone who specializes in sexual trauma who's within the community, and she may be able to qualify for the Veterans Choice Act, or now it's called the Missions Act, and we can help support her and facilitate that. However, the challenge is that not all civilian mental health providers understand the culture and the mindset of military personnel, which can sometimes be very, very difficult. But those, unfortunately, are really all the services. Also, one other thing, sorry, the Orange County Veterans and Military Families Collaborative, we do have other working groups. There's one in particular, Dr. Ron Gellis, I believe. So if you email me or reach out to me, I can give you some other resources. But suffice it to say, there are organizations that want to help her, and we as a team of advocates can help support that need. I'm glad that that question was asked.
Thanks, Mietta. I appreciate you clarifying that too.
Absolutely.
Okay, do we have more questions from our audience? I know that there's various folks kind of communicating on the chat window, which is another reason why I love our GoToMeeting here, is that so many people get questions and make connections just via this software. It's excellent. So if we don't have more questions, then I can wrap this up with a few comments. Otherwise, please feel free to ask the questions to our presenters, Nancy and Mietta.
Let me just close with one thing. On the last page of our book, there is a conclusion of our findings, our research findings. There's conclusions and recommendations, and I really ask you to read those. I also want you to read 3 things that female veterans wanted. They expressed an interest in colleges enhancing is provide better understanding of my military benefits, make information more available, and connect women veterans with women vet services. I think that's one of the goals that Mietta and I have really delved into with Steve Peck from US Vets, is providing more women vet services. He's a huge advocate in DC. We need to try and expand on that, maybe even bring in a coalition of women through our WAC group or what have you, that we can build specific services centered on veterans, female veterans' needs. I think that would be a great thing to do, and I'd like to challenge this group to even try and make that happen within your own area and see what you can do to outreach to women's organizations that female veterans could feel comfortable with. So I'd like to see if we could do that and maybe support that a little bit too, as we delve into our next portion of trying to figure out how we actually address what we found in this survey and what we're looking at and how we're going to make it happen. Because that's the idea. It doesn't help anybody if we do a survey if we don't try and get to how we answer those questions and make it happen for our female veterans to get the support they need. So that's what I'd like to end with. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we will make this, we will make the link available to everybody regarding the survey. This will also include a survey that we're going to ask you to participate in, just answer a few questions about how you enjoyed today's webinar. And then I hope that you all can stay tuned for our future webinars. We'll be sending information out on that soon. But just to close up, I want people to understand too, this is very, very significant. This survey is really a small part of a much bigger picture. And that bigger picture is that our college campuses represent one of the most crucial entry points into civilian life for women veterans. Women veterans pursue their education at rates higher than male veterans. They also attain their education, whether it's a graduate, postdoctoral, or undergraduate degree, at rates higher than male veterans. So it's really important that it is not only a place where we see them as often as we do, but that we understand the significance of an experience on a college campus and what that can provide for a woman veteran. This is the place where women veterans really begin their post-military lives. This is the place where they are first introduced to new social relationships and professional relationships in a very new dynamic as they go through such a significant transition in their lives. I mean, the transition from military to civilian life cannot be overstated about how crucial and important it is in the time of life for a person. The other thing is that this is also the opportunity, and we don't get many of these very often, to introduce a woman veteran to the panoply of services that exist among all of our organizations. This is really where people learn about their military benefits, where they are introduced to the right types of organizations. And the reason that we've backed up and taken that process even earlier with the TAPS program, or with the TAP program, the Transition GPS, or our CalTAP program here in California, is because that's such a significant thing to do. Now, we have a ton of people who participated in today's webinar, and many more still, who are professional educators across our college campuses, whether it's the UC, the CSU, or the community college system, who do this day to day, who work with veterans day to day, build great programs for veterans, including great programs for women veterans, for various points of advocacy, regular celebrations, making sure women veteran voices are included in the planning that they do for their college campuses in support of their veterans. I hope that we see this survey as a really great jumping off point to better assess how far we've come and how much better we can do in the future. Because what we're really seeing here is that I think we've made a lot of progress serving veterans on our campus. We've made a lot of progress serving women veterans on our campuses, but there's still areas that maybe we didn't think to look into that we can do an even better job. And that's not the community college campus's job necessarily to do a lot of these things. This is, the state of California. This is the federal government. This is community-based resources. This is the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. There's so many other organizations that I think need to bring to bear the resources that are happening on the college campuses and say, how can we support these campuses in making sure women veterans in those programs are getting the services that they need. Because sometimes that educator on the college campus is really answering questions in any manner of things, whether it's securing housing and taking care of food instability and childcare. And those are not the things that are necessarily in their wheelhouse. But what they do have behind them is a whole network of us, of service organizations, of advocates, and just all of us in the veteran services world to support them to make sure that those veterans on the campuses, those women veterans, are getting what they need. So I just want to end with that, because this is just an excellent jumping off point, this study, to continue the conversation about how we're serving women veterans on our college campuses. Okay, so that's how I'm going to end. Miata and Nancy, I know you already gave great closing remarks. Is there anything else, Miata, that you'd like to add here?
The only thing, and thank you for that, Lindsay, and all of the information that you just shared. I think for me, I think it's so important for us to recognize, again, I can't overemphasize this enough, to recognize that we are so much more empowered than we may think. As we were talking about the Sacramento trip, one of the thematic comments from the veterans after we had gone to Sacramento was literally in awe. Oh my gosh, when we went in and we talked to the assembly members, they were listening to us. They were taking notes. They were really interested in what we had to say, because we had encouraged them, tell them your branch of service, let them know how long you were in, let them know some of the challenges that you faced once you got out, and how important it is to have a VRC. They were so shocked to recognize that their voices mattered and that people really wanted to hear what they had to say. And it's because of them that that these small changes grow and grow and grow until we see the kind of impact that we're wanting to have. So again, I just want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to join us, Nancy and myself this afternoon. And just to recognize that we as a team of advocates are so much more empowered and so much more capable than we sometimes view ourselves, and we just look at ourselves in the mirror alone. And just want to kind of encourage us to continue to move things forward and know that what we're already doing is making a difference. And I think that would be it for me, Lindsay. Thank you. And again, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon.
Nancy and Miata, thank you so much for your work on this survey and on the report, and thanks for being a part of this presentation. And to all of our participants, we just really appreciate the continued support and your continued participation. To show up, to be a part of our webinars means a lot. It means we're getting the education out and the resources out to the people that need them most. So thank you for that. And more to come on this subject. This will not be our last conversation, I hope, on the importance of supporting women veterans on college campuses. And I hope everyone has an excellent Wednesday, and stay tuned soon for an announcement on our next upcoming webinar for the month of September. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.